All right, so this week we are moving into the Old Kingdom, which is sometimes referred to as the Pyramid Age, and we'll find that out soon enough why it's named like that. I've given you the dates here, plus the dynasty. So it's generally dated from the third dynasty up to the seventh and eighth dynasties. Now, in terms of the way that the government was set up, so if you look at your atlas, be sure to look at Memphis. That was the capital, and as I put here, it's just south of where the Delta region begins. The pharaoh owns the entire country, or owned the entire country, so everything in it, the people, and so on. Now he had responsibilities, and this is something referred to as ma'at, M-A-A-T, which means he's responsible for administering the law with justice. And what you'll see is if you look up a lot of the pharaoh's names, they include this ma'at within their names. Now he's sitting at the top of the pyramid of the government. Just below him are the scribes, or what I've called literary elites. Now they run everything in the government for the pharaoh. So they take care of the temples or the mortuary complexes. They collect and distribute taxes. And remember, there's no money economy, so we're talking about agriculture here. So they collect taxes in agriculture and then dole everything out in terms of subsidies, and we've talked about that. Below them, you've got the rest of the population. Now, one thing I do want to mention here is that Egypt is a fairly large country, and it was difficult for the pharaoh to control everything. So what they ended up doing is sort of like what we did in our country, where they divided it up into states. Now, these are called nomes. And then there's a nomarch, a governor, who controls what's happening within the state. And of course, everyone owes their allegiance to the pharaoh, but that's how the Egyptian government was set up. Now, in terms of the economy, if you look at the land, the total land mass of ancient Egypt, you've got, as I said, the pharaoh owned everything, but you've got the land that the king owns, which sometimes these are these religious estates or these mortuary complexes, and then you've got individually owned land. Now, we've talked about a little bit about bureaucracy in ancient Egypt, and we know that they were really keen on keeping track of everything. So they were taking censuses of people. They also kept track of how many animals were in ancient Egypt, and then crop yields. And of course, this is one way to forecast what might happen in the future. I've mentioned this a few times already. The economy during the Old Kingdom is not slave-based. There certainly were slaves caught in battle, but it was not slave-based. So a lot of the effort that's going to put into building these pyramids was done by a lot of people who were sort of off-season in terms of agriculture. So when the plants weren't growing or being harvested, the people would be conscripted to work on these massive projects. And of course, this is the pyramid age, so massive building projects getting started. And I'll talk about some of the sizes of these buildings when we get to that particular section. And then, of course, no big surprise, trade is increasing because a lot of what's happening is these pyramids are being built, lots of wealth is going into them, and a lot of the wealth that they're using did not come from within Egypt, so it came from outside. Sometimes a pyramid has been called a cosmic engine, and what that means is all of religion sort of runs around these structures. Now, what's really interesting is towards the middle end of the Old Kingdom, we get something called the pyramid texts. And what I've got on a few of these slides are some of the pyramid texts themselves. And you can just search pyramid texts on Google and read a bunch of these. Now, of course, the pyramid is a funerary monument. So early buildings, the place where the pharaoh was buried was underground, and then like mastaba was put on top. And then later in the larger pyramids, the burial chamber is inside of the pyramid itself. Now, the pyramid was designed to take the pharaoh and all his court and everything into the afterlife. Even with some of these great pyramids, you've got boats, and we talked about this a few weeks ago. Boats were buried around some of these structures, and that was sort of probably ferrying the pharaoh and his household into the afterlife. And these buildings were protected. I've given you a quote here, and you might want to stop the video because I won't read this, but it talks about how the pyramid is protected and what will happen if you break into a pyramid. Okay, the pyramid text. So these first started in Dynasty 5, and what I've got here is, you can see in the background a little bit of hieroglyphs on this wall. So this is coming from Unis's burial chamber. And these texts run along, sometimes run along the walls, they run along the ceilings. No big surprise, they're associated with the god Osiris, who was the god of resurrection. So if you're looking for a god to follow into the afterlife, that would certainly be the one. Now these pyramid texts are designed for the pharaohs. So you don't find these in commoner graves until a little bit later, and then they're called coffin texts, but we'll talk about that later. Here's another burial chamber with writing up on the walls and then on the ceiling. And then here's the burial chamber of Unis. You can see all the writing here, writing on the ceilings and so on. Okay, so I've got a couple slides with some of these pyramid texts. So I'm not going to read these to you. So what I'd like you to do is to stop the video and read them yourself. So this is from Utterance 213. And again, you can find these on the internet. And then here's Utterance 215. Again, go ahead and stop the video and read through these. And then Utterance 273 of Pharaoh Teti's pyramid. Again, stop the video to read through this. Okay, so the end of the Old Kingdom. Now, when I talk about the Great Pyramids, I'll show you some data on the amount of stone that's being used throughout the Old Kingdom. And what you find is an incredible amount of building materials being used at the beginning of the Old Kingdom. And by the 6th dynasty, the building of these massive pyramids come to an end. And of course, what you really want to start thinking about is why is this happening? And what is it telling us about the economy? And what is it telling us about politics? Which of course all ties into sustainability. So we'll talk about the very end of the Old Kingdom in a lecture next week. And then I list here the pharaohs for the 6th dynasty, not all that important. Actually not important at all. I don't want you to memorize these names, but I just want you to be aware that this is a time frame when the Old Kingdom ends, and it's possible that we start to see some weather changes taking place. So the end of the Old Kingdom and into the First Intermediate period might have been a drier period, but I'll save that for a future lecture.